welcome to the Underground, my little underground with Peter A.
It's My Little Underground. I'm Peter A. This week on the show, we're going back 10 years to 2013 to talk up some albums I've been listening to a ton at the time, as well as some artists that put out music in 2013, but I didn't discover them until a few years afterwards. And you'll get a nice little insight as to what I was listening to as a young 19-year-old young man. So we're going to kick things off talking about a couple of rap tag teams, starting with Czarface, which is the team of 7L and Esoteric and Inspectah Deck. Now, they've been working with each other for years up until this point, and this is when they just decided to come together and put out an album. They were just hanging out, and that hangout studio session became Czarface. Now, when I first heard this album, I just heard a lot of comic books and pro wrestling fandom just blended with hip-hop culture. And their debut self-titled album featured production from mostly 7L, except for Let It Off, which was produced by DJ Premier. And this album was kind of everything I wanted from a hip-hop album at the time until this day. It's very raw, and it just focuses on just lyricism and great production and great themes that aren't just, about partying and doing drugs and what have you. It was very nerdy. It was very MF Doom-like, talking about comic books and pro wrestling, which is way up my alley, right? And what's interesting about Czarface from a wrestling standpoint, it really connected with a lot of wrestlers. For example, Finn Balor and MVP have all been spotted on social media wearing their merch. Some of my favorites from this first album: Marvel Team Up, Dead Zone, Savagely Attacked with Ghostface Killah, and It's Raw. Moving on to my next rap tag team of 2013, Run the Jewels. Killer Mike and LP put out their debut album this year, and they were introduced by an executive over at Cartoon Network, and they worked together on rap music and Cancer for Cure, rap music being Killer Mike's project and Cancer for Cure being LP's project, and they ended up touring together in 2012 when these two albums came out, and it was just a match made in heaven musically. And I'm going to share a quote from Killer Mike at the time that just defines what Run the Jewels is and why it still exists today. I'm just hopelessly optimistic, and I'm a romantic, and I knew the first 3 beats L ever played for me that for the rest of my career, this motherfucker is going to produce me. Killer Mike on LP. And when you hear these two together, especially their first 3 albums, well, their whole discography, you feel that connection and that camaraderie. Now, one thing I love about Run the Jewels is that their first 3 albums, at least, they put them out for free with the option to buy. Because I remember, just downloading their albums at first and then going to a record store and seeing their albums for sale. I'm like, why should I buy this? I already have it. But when you hear their music, to me, I loved it so much that I bought them physically. When Run the Jewels 2 came out, I, of course, downloaded first, listened to it, and I loved it. And I went ahead and bought the CD, and I'm still listening to this album till this day. Almost a decade later, I'm still listening to them. And just like Czarface, Run the Jewels is exactly what I love about hip-hop, everything I want from a hip-hop album. Focus on sharp, witty lyricism and just spectacular production. Creative and innovative production, too, because I think LP is one of the most creative hip-hop producers of the last 20 years. Nothing sounds like him, and their stuff is very abrasive and punch you in the face, but they really talk about what's going on in the world. They talk a lot about police brutality and political corruption and all that stuff. Killer Masters, all that good stuff. So that's Killer Mike and LP, Run the Jewels. Still listening to their stuff a decade later. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, shoegaze. And 2013, at least the early part of the 2010s, there was a bit of a shoegaze revival because this band made a return. That's My Bloody Valentine. They released MBV in 2013. At this time, this was their first album in 22 years. And it showcased their experiment side with songs like If This and Yes, and the really cool electronic interludes. And it was a nice break from like their usual noisy, beautiful chaos. And a lot of side B, like In Another Way, Nothing Is, Wonder 2, is just kind of left field for My Bloody Valentine. And when you put this album on, it's My Bloody Valentine as you known and love them, because you can't really say, oh, this is a quote-unquote return to form, because My Bloody Valentine sound is a very creative and innovative sound, and that's been replicated a lot. Yes, you hear their music and you hear Cocteau Twins and Jesus and Mary Chain, but you hear their influence, but they're not exactly doing what those two bands did, if that makes sense. They created their own unique sound that has been attempted to replicate, but you can't really replicate what they're doing. You know what I mean? Like it's really, you could try your best, but you can't really be a carbon copy of My Bloody Valentine. You can try, but it ain't gonna work. And there was a band out of UK this year, The History of Apple Pie. And they're a British noise pop shoegaze outfit. They put out their debut album this year, Out of View. They started out as a duo making bedroom demos on MySpace. Stephanie Min and Jerome Watson, and they later recruited James Thomas, who also plays drums on Parakeet, and then Kelly Owens on bass, and Aslam Gwari, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, on guitar. And this group mixes pretty melodies mixed with My Bloody Valentine-like noise. But the difference between History of Apple Pie and My Bloody Valentine is that it's more about melody than about creating some sort of sound and aesthetic. It's more just catchy tunes with some feedback and noisy guitars. But it's still really good. You could tell, like, you could see the Big Bang effect of My Bloody Valentine. And around this time period, after listening to, this is the year I started to really get into My Bloody Valentine. It changed how I looked at music. I think I talked about this on my Loveless episode a couple of years back, celebrating the 30th anniversary of Loveless, and it really did change how I look at music. And I was already used to listening to bands like Sonic Youth and listening to Nirvana and hearing a lot of noise and feedback. But My Bloody Valentine added a beauty to it, and in a totally different way that I just can't really unpack. I mean, I guess you could sit with an engineer and a guitar tech, and they could probably tell you some of the things that Kevin Shields was doing. But just as a listener, it's just something to experience, and it's something unique. And it taught me, listening to My Bloody Valentine taught me that there's beauty in chaos. So yeah, 10 years later, I'm still listening to History of Apple Pie, and I'm still listening to My Bloody Valentine, especially MBV. And History of Apple Pie, they followed up Out of View in 2014 with Feel Something, which was also great, but they silently broke up in 2015, which makes me sad, because I was thinking, like, what happened to them? Where's the History of Apple Pie stuff? And James was doing Parakeet in 2016, and I'm like, where's the History of Apple Pie? And then I just did some digging, and I found out that they just broke up quietly. On the bright side, I do think that Always from Canada definitely picked up where History of Apple Pie left off in 2015, when they got started in 2014. and some of my favorite songs from the History of Apple Pie debut, Mallory, and Do It Wrong. All right, now we're going to talk about some great comeback albums. Well, a good portion of this episode are comeback albums. So we're going to start things off with Alice in Chains. They put out their Devil Put Dinosaurs Here album, and this was a follow-up to their official comeback album, Back Gives Way to Blue in 2009. And this is their second album with their new singer, William Duvall. And I feel like William does a great job with harmonizing with Jerry Cantrell. And speaking of this album, Jerry Cantrell said this: "The title track and album title refer to the hypocrisy of organized religion and homophobia." And as he said, this is definitely evident in the title track. And my favorite songs off this album is Lap Monkey, Breath on the Window, and Low Ceiling. Now, regarding Alice in Chains, I think of, the early grunge era with Nirvana, Alice in Chains, of course, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, all that Seattle stuff. I think Alice in Chains is a little bit underrated in that regard, because I think they're probably the best band out of all of them, in my opinion. I think they have really great songwriting, really great harmonies, really tremendous riffs. I think they're just a full package. And I don't know. I don't know why they don't get the attention as their counterparts do. But they're still going strong to this day, and they're still making great music. And I think maybe this is why they're not as popular as Pearl Jam or Nirvana or Soundgarden, because their music is very depressing. It's very depressing. Now, what keeps sunny optimists like me listening to their music is the fact that it's really, really good, and the harmonies are great. Their songs sound pretty, but they're really sad. They're really depressing. But to me, as long as the music's really good, there's certain types of songs that can be a little bit too depressing, but sometimes like there could be like a juxtaposition. It could be really sad themes, but really welcoming and bright melodies. And I think Alice in Chains definitely have that. You definitely hear the sadness, the Seattle sadness, but I just think Alice in Chains are extraordinary, and I think people should definitely take a deeper look into their catalog if you're ready to write off the whole grunge period of music. Moving on to another comeback album, Yeah Yeah Yeah's Mosquito, and this is kind of a return to form because they released their very electronic-centric It's Bliss album in 2009. I would argue that It's Bliss is probably one of their weakest albums, even though some of their biggest hits are on there, and some of my favorite songs, too. Zero and Heads a Roll are phenomenal songs. It's just that album is not phenomenal. But Mosquito brings back their raw garage rock sound from their first EP and their first album. Songs like Mosquito, Area 52. And also on this album, they got really lo-fi and left field with songs like Subway, which samples the New York City subway, which is really cool how they did it. And their gospel-influenced Sacrilege, which is probably one of their best songs in their catalog, too. Really great stuff here. I don't think Mosquito is my favorite Yeah Yeah's album. I listened to it a little bit when it came out, but I can't say I've been listening to it a ton since then, even though I still think about the songs that I named are the songs that you should listen to from this album if you're going to. But I can't say, if someone wanted to get into the AES, I would not necessarily recommend this album. I would recommend, their Their first EP, the Machine EP, and their first album, and Fever to Tell. And Show Your Bones is really good too. But that wave, that era of Yeah Yeahs, I recommend. Don't necessarily recommend It's Bliss or Mosquito, even though I think Mosquito is probably a better album than It's Bliss, but I still, not my favorite of their catalog. But in 2013, I went to go see them at the Googa Mooga Festival in Prospect Park. Now, what the Googa Mooga Festival was, they took a lot of restaurants from, I think it was Brooklyn restaurants or New York City restaurants, and they put them all in one place. It was kind of what Smorgasbord is now in Williamsburg. And they had music. So they had The Darkness, Flaming Lips, and Yeah Yeahs. And they had another stage with Chairlift DJing, which was really cool. And I checked them out, and I've never heard of Chairlift until this show. And they were DJing, and Caroline Polachek, there wasn't a lot of people watching them. There was a few, but I was watching them, and Caroline Polachek waved, and she waved to me, there wasn't a lot of people, so she waved to me, and I waved back, and it was really cool. It was really cool to see them, in the flesh. And then when the main show was going on the main stage, while Darkness was performing, Caroline Polachek, she walks in front of me, and I wave to her, and she waves back to me, and she offers me her drink, and I said no. And yes, at the time, I was under 21. I was 19, but I'm a non-drinker. So there you go. I think she nodded like she understood. Either she probably thought I was probably too young, or I probably didn't drink. But who cares? It was nice. It was a nice moment. And Yeah Yeahs did a hell of a show. A hell of a show this night. It was unbelievable. The amount of energy from just 3 people. Just 3 people give that much energy. It was nuts. And they had this gigantic eyeball beach ball that they tossed into the crowd. It was nuts. I had so much fun that night. It was one of the most memorable shows I've ever been to. Incredible. Also this year, Queens of the Stone Age made a comeback, putting out their first album since 2007, Era Vulgaris, and this year in 2013 they put out Like Clockwork. And I think it's interesting how they went from putting out their weakest album to one of their strongest. And Josh Homme was hospitalized right before in between Era Vulgaris and Like Clockwork, and he went through a deep depression too. So there was a huge break in albums during this time, and they were going through some lineup changes as well. Classic Queens of the Stone Age. They've been going through lineup changes since they started. And this album has a lot of creative, exploring a lot of like cosmic, psychedelic, and jazz sounds on Calypsia, for example. And of course they have the trademark sounds, like My God Is a Sun, with Dave Grohl on the drums, so it's very just a loud rock and roll explosion with a catchy hook, classic Queens of the Stone Age. This album, as per most Queens of the Stone Age albums, is very collaborative. You had Dave Grohl, of course, Elton John, Alex Turner, Mark Lanigan, and Trent Reznor. It kind of feels more like Songs for the Deaf, where there was a ton of guests. And this was in a similar way, but not as much as that album. It still has like a Desert Sessions feel to it, just all the different collaborations happening. But of their catalog, this is actually one of the better Queens of the Stone Age albums. I can't say I listen to it a lot anymore, but it's still a great album in their catalog if you're looking to get into this band. Okay. The last comeback album on the list, Quasimodo. Yes Sir Whatever. This is the first official Quasimodo release since The Further Adventures of Lord Quas back in 2005. And this was not an official Quasimodo album. It was a compilation of rare and unreleased gems from out-of-print 7 inches to songs with uncleared samples. But this sounds so cohesive. It's almost like it is the third Quasimodo album. And amongst my favorite tunes on this album, they have a lot of simple but relatable themes. Among my favorite tunes on this album, they have simple but relatable themes. He's calling out his hip hop peers on Brothers Can't See Me, having buyer's remorse, essentially. He says, every time I buy the tape, that should be boring me, paying good money to hear some whack shit. And of course, Young Blood, that has a lot of nostalgia and the innocence of youth. Great stuff. And the front, about jealousy and fair weather friends. I think Madlib did a hell of a job with this compilation album that sounds like an album. And I'm glad Stone's Throw reissued it because I was able to pick it up. And I love Quasimodo. I love it so much. The Unseen is one of my favorite albums ever. Did a show on it a couple years ago with my brother Ismaili Arriaga, and it had a lasting impact on me because it's so creative. It's like listening to, a movie, and it's very funny. It's very charming. You can sit back, relax, and just get lost in it, and it's just fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but the music is still, the production is just out of this world. It's very, it's like MF Doom, very charming, very tongue in cheek, but it's still just impeccable, and you can't replicate it. You can't do it. Don't try to rip off Madlib. You're gonna fall flat on your face. And lastly, we're going to talk about some important debuts in 2013, and these artists I didn't know about at the time, but I did discover them a few years later, and these artists have had a major impact on me. I'm going to kick things off with Courtney Barnett, who debuted in 2013 with the double EP, A Sea of Split Peas, and this is made up of 2 EPs, How to Carve a Carrot into a Rose, and I've Got a Friend Called Emily Harris. And this EP, like the rest of Courtney Barnett's discography, is narrative driven, including the very famous Avant-Gardener, which speaks to anxiety and actually depicts an anxiety attack while gardening. Here's a very memorable lyric from the song. The paramedic thinks I'm clever because I play guitar. I think she's clever because she stops people dying. Powerful, powerful, powerful stuff. I love Courtney Barnett. And my entry point to her was 2015's Sometimes I Just Sit and Think and Sometimes I Just Sit. Till this day, one of my favorite albums of the last decade or so because of her narrative style, her really impeccable songwriting, really great lyrics. You get lost in it and you can just relate it to your life. And seeing her live is just incredible. I got to see her at Radio City Music Hall last year, and oh my god, she's just tremendous. I caught her at Prospect Park in 2018 in the rain. I was soaked, but it was a very memorable experience. Actually, when I got there, they started the show early. I thought, okay, I can wait a little bit to get there. And Julian Baker and Vagabond were opening for her. And I really wanted to see Vagabond and Julian Baker too. I wanted to just check them out. But I think they already went on. And then as soon as I got there, I went to go order food. I got a very expensive veggie burger that tasted awful. And Courtney Barnett was playing. I'm like, oh shit, she's starting. But if you haven't seen her yet, she's a must-see. And lastly, let's talk about La Luz, who debuted in 2013 with It's Alive. This is the debut album from them, from one of the best hardly art bands. And they just grab you with their gorgeous harmonies and equally beautiful and potent surf-like guitar tones and solos. And I discovered them in 2015 with Weirdo Shrine. And some of my favorite songs off of It's Alive, All the Time, great guitar solo, and Morning High, just infectious riff, then just beautiful harmonies and melodies. 2013, interesting year for music. It was a year of great debuts, great collaborative albums, and very important debuts, which is good. And I'm going to have a companion playlist. All the artists I named today, I'm going to put into a nice little Spotify playlist that I would link in the episode description. And we're going to wrap it up for 2013. We're going to come back into 2023. I'm Peter A. You can follow My Little Underground on socials, facebook.com/MLUpod, Twitter @MLUpod, Instagram @MLUpod. And that's it. Later days.
My Little Underground.